It's gotta be out there somewhere. What? The goat said. I can feel it in my bones, but where? Of course. But could it really be so simple? A lot of people think this is the best game in the series. Almost, if not just as many as those who think 2 is the best. The series really leaves a big shoe to fill, and as I play through these games, I become more and more sad, not only with the progression, but with the fact that the series is a skeleton anymore. If you want to know if I think you should play this game, I do. So go do that before you watch this video, especially if you don't know anything about it. So what's the deal with Silent Hill 3? First of all, it's a sequel to the first game, and has nothing to do with the previous antagonists, but at a certain point I become curious as to how close these two characters' visits are. We play as the daughter of the original's protagonist, Harry Mason, and coming in I figured the game would be really self-aware of that, but it almost plays it off like we didn't know that, weren't supposed to know that, or hopefully wouldn't piece the dynamic together after putting all the first game's story together. Once Claudia enters the scene, it becomes incredibly easy to piece things together, or to at least get a vague idea of what's going on if you played through the first game. But being 2 was so different from the original, I guess I could see unsuspecting first players being caught off guard, but I digress. So, after the success of Silent Hill 2, what happened with Silent Hill 3? Some people will say this was the point the series began to decline after this title, and personally I can see the arch beginning in Silent Hill 3's narrative. So what did the game do right, and what did it do wrong for the series? The game kicks off in a dream. It's dark, it's dank, it's rusty, and there's dead people and bunny costumes in a few spots. This game is really oppressive and claustrophobic, and the opening is reflective of that. The first enemies encountered in the game too are the Hellhounds, returned from the first game with a new look, and there's a few little areas to explore here. It's a pretty basic tutorial until... What the hell was that? Oh, it's a fucking creep! And Heather wakes up to find it was all just a dream as she wakes up in some cafe. After this happens, she calls her father and says she's going home. And we meet a rather odd character. The voice acting in this game is good when it needs to be, but the voice of this guy is something.
Are you still following me? Do I have to scream?
Sorry. I'll wait here.
Something for sure. Heather sounds great, although she has her ham-fisted lines here and there. And plenty of scenes are convincing and believable too. Anyways, Heather slips away from the detective through the bathroom, and this is where everything takes a turn. We head through an alleyway into another section of the mall to be greeted by big sloppy dogs once again, and actually get into the meat of the game. There's actually a few details in this opening I want to point out. First of all, what the hell is up with this room? The first time I ever came here, I genuinely thought someone was just slamming on my window or something. I just sat there for a moment wondering whether or not the sound was real, but it plays every time you enter the room. We'll have to remember this key under the pallet over here too, and if this is your second playthrough, you can get the saber outside the hall in this room too.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Wow.
I felt like it was a little intense being thrown into this huge area right at the beginning of the game, my first playthrough, but it's actually pretty condensed, and even really well directed at times too. One moment I remember really fondly is entering the room with the flashlight for the first time, and after scavenging, trying to hit the light switch on the wall and seeing the light illuminating Heather from under the boxes. Brilliant. But what's not so brilliant is the lack of conveyance the game can have here and there. Like the room next to the flashlight room with the cleaner in it, and the bathroom up these escalators with nothing in it. Egoraptor talks a little about conveyance in his sequelitis series, and for the most part I think this series has nailed it in each installment, with great camera angles and masterful level design. The third title is a lot of the same of that, but here and there on my second playthrough I found myself passing up key items and having to backtrack several rooms, which is never a fun thing to do. From here there's a few nice puzzles, even if some of the later puzzles seem to fall a little short, or be more streamlined, like this key item only a hall away from the area it's used at, or the painfully obvious walnut in the torture device. Some puzzles feel copped out, while other ones feel entirely satisfying, yet relatively simple to solve. Once we've made it through the hellish otherworld of the mall and met up with the detective once again, it's revealed that Claudia hired him to find you as a missing persons case. And after some short exposition, Heather leaves to take the subway home. I assumed this would be simple and the game would really kick off from here. She goes to the subway, it fades to black, and she's home. But instead the developers decided to include this into the journey. Not that it's all bad, I just felt it was the wrong direction. Admittedly, the subway is one of the most tense and atmospheric moments for me, with letters on the ground talking of ghosts haunting the places they died, and even spooky ghosts on its platforms. Ooh. And we wander around a bit to find a nutcracker and delve deeper into the subway. Heather runs into the insane cancer enemy after finding the shotgun, which, let me just say, is a perfect example of the atmosphere the game is absolutely drenched in. And heads further into the subway to take a train that nearly kills her after investigating what looks like maybe a closet or something, I don't fucking know. And so then Heather braves the shallows of the sewers and runs into a few questionable monster things, after riding a runaway train with no driving cab, oddly enough. There's this bridge in this section where if you look into the water below, you can see a figure of a monster that really struck me my first playthrough. He's even gone when you come back after grabbing the blow dryer, which leads me to the tentacle monster and the sewage fairy. So if you approach the water in this room before plugging in the blow dryer and you don't have the rusty pipe equipped, you can drop it into the water and a fairy will come out with a gold and steel pipe. Isn't that neat? She asks a couple questions and if you're honest, she gives you all the pipes. Also, there's a tentacle monster. So then Heather exits the sewers and makes her way through the Hilltop Center using a rope and a jack to traverse an elevator shaft only to end up in the other worlds. Yep. But here's a good time to talk about some lore. Heather turns the valve on the bathtub, and just like that, she begins to transition. It's a scene that really strikes a chord. The walls fade away and an eerie screeching sound can be heard as Heather clutches her head and passes out. In a making-of tape for Silent Hill, one of the directors states that turning the valves represents the flow of water coming through the pipes as Heather, or later in the game Valtier, turns the valve and the world turns into a nightmarish landscape. There's even a theory that Valtier and Pyramid Head are one and the same, or either different perceptions or reincarnations of the series' Red God. Click the annotation to check out the video. This personally was one of the most interesting parts of the game. The idea of gods, at least when spoken of by cultists or characters in video games, is easy to shrug off and dismiss. But the deities like the Red God and the Yellow God become more when thought of in a different light as shepherds on these characters' paths. Pyramid Head ultimately leads James to his self-discovery, just as Valtier leads Heather through her journey, controlling the boundaries of reality around her, most likely with the help of the god fetus inside of her. When Silent Hill 3 and the original's combined narrative come together to create moments like these are when the game shines brilliantly. There are moments where you can see some of the greatest minds come together with a goal in mind, and they absolutely killed it. Scenes like when Heather is traveling with Douglas to Silent Hill after Harry is found, and the way they form this relationship when originally Douglas only seemed to be some creep detective. But by the time they're in Silent Hill, they're cracking jokes and revealing bits of character to each other. There's plenty of symbolism weaved into the environment and stories, and Team Silent definitely wasn't slacking on this title. But as much as I want to love the plot, I can't help but feel that it's dry, rehashed, and unoriginal. Where I think this game really shines is in the game. The controls are so tight and the sound design is fantastic. Everything here is wonderful. There was a few new things done here and there, and everything looks fantastic compared to the previous titles. And the monsters are now smarter and stronger too. Their fantastic sound design creates a suffocating atmosphere that makes you constantly feel in danger. And every corner builds a little more tension until finally, everything is silent. Huh. So that's weird. It's not too often in a hallway like this, it's just... Oh god, that's too loud! It's scary! These monsters absolutely complement the key finding, door checking gameplay the series sports, and especially in later Otherworld segments keeps the tension high as you rush around checking to see which doors will open as bulbous fleshy monsters twitch along the cold steel floors swatting at you aggressively. It's fantastic. Anyways, I sort of skipped ahead. Heather finds her way back home from the Hilltop Center's other world to find that her father, Harry Mason, was murdered. When I first saw this scene, I was actually in denial. I thought maybe it would just be a dream or something. No way would they kill Harry, but they did. So yeah, Harry's dead. Claudia tells Heather that she'll be waiting in Silent Hill, and our heroine and Douglas set off. Silent Hill is as desolate and lonely as ever, if not more this time around. You can see even less than you could on the streets in the last game, and the newer enemies roam around making really loud and sudden noises that are bound to catch you off guard. Douglas goes off to search for Leonard, and Heather goes to check the hospital a few blocks away from the motel. This hospital is straight out of Silent Hill 2, and initially it feels really nice. No environment seems too strung out or overdone in this game, but the lack of originality here is a gripe of mine. Heather solves a few puzzles and finds a few items before speaking on the phone with Claudia's father, and being told to go to the second floor where we find a door that definitely wasn't there last time we were here. It's around this point, when we enter Silent Hill, that I feel memorable set pieces fade away. The quality of the environments and the gameplay and the puzzles are all consistent, and yet I can only think of a few memorable moments beyond this length of the game. While the intro did feel a bit rushed with the way the player is just thrusted into the world like that, the environments were new and different from locations in previous games, which is a breath of fresh air, especially towards the subway section. But once Heather is in Silent Hill, there are only a few more locations left to go, and one of them is from the last game. 2 if you count Harry's amusement park escapades towards the end of the first game, which is the direction this game goes in as well. There's a line by Heather around the halfway point when her and Douglas are driving to Silent Hill that indefinitely sums up the plot of this game shortly.
Tried to summon the ancient god of the town. She offered up her very own daughter. The girl gave birth to a god, but I think Claudia's trying to do the same thing again.
And that's precisely what happens. We're told before we've even made it through the halfway point what's going to happen and the direction the story is going in. Silent Hill 2 had misdirection, and this is a great example of why exactly 2 did so well. Regardless, Heather trudges on through the hospital and into the other world where we finally meet Leonard after a bit of exploring and... dear God. He's another boss fight, so with that being said, now seems like a good time to get into the boss fights of the game. The first being the split worm, which I personally believe is a sort of metaphor or symbol for the fact that Heather is literally impregnated with the embryo of a god, hence the phallic structure of the boss as well. The mission area is a not so memorable fight that comes after this, and before we travel to Silent Hill, and it works for what it is, but it's seriously lacking as a boss fight. In fact, all of these bosses are lacking, I would say, but I digress. Leonard is the boss of Brookhaven, and while as a character he's especially elusive and mysterious, his attacks aren't much, and his pattern is predictable. Heather gives a few sassy little punches in the dialogue here before the fight, and we get his seal afterwards. Heading into the amusement park after speaking with Vincent back at the motel for the final section of the game. It begins exactly like the beginning of the dream sequence. Dead mascots and all. From here we go through a little spooky haunted house, find a red heel, use a chain to pry open a gate, and most importantly, fight Alessa. While the fight itself is fairly simple and straightforward, the scene beforehand is marvelous if you ask me. Once you're on the carousel, you have to damage each one of the horses until they're no longer moving, and only then does Alessa approach you. And just before, there's this little cutscene with all these Aztec visuals and music that just nails every box, and personally, it's my favorite moment of the whole game. If the entirety of the game had leaned more in this direction, it could have easily surpassed the second title with a more cohesive and gripping plot as well. Anyways, fight Alessa whatever way you please.
Damn!
And after this, we emerge from a sloppy, damp hallway and into a church? Yeah, a church. Okay. So here's the final stretch. Heather, as Alessa, has a little dialogue here with Claudia, and we set off to find the 5 tarot cards, and visit a few interesting rooms, one with some interesting exposition in it as well. A bit of backstory can be found here and there in these dead-end rooms that will spawn enemies in the hallways outside of them once you enter, and these actually serve to keep the tension high, even this close to the end, as an area you feel totally comfortable in becomes hostile in a moment's notice, which is unpleasant to say the least. A few hidden passageways, a little ghost girl, and several red-orange rusty hallways later, and we're suddenly in Alessa's childhood room trying to figure out which card goes where. And once we've got all that figured out, we're treated with the scene of Vincent and Claudia arguing for a bit before Claudia jabs a knife through Vincent's back, actually literally, as he tries to get you to kill Claudia. After the scene, if you haven't been paying attention, things will be a little amiss. This was an odd decision choice, and frankly I could see people not understanding what's missing here, which would really suck. But if Heather takes out her pendant, inside of it is the Aglafotis, which is said to have the power to dispel evil entities, and well, we do just that here. Crazy Claudia then decides to swallow the god fetus that was just inside Heather whole, and her god is born, although under incorrect conditions, which allows Heather to swoop in there and take after her father. After all of this is over, Heather walks away and actually glimpses back for a moment before this last scene here. And one of the directors, Ito, says it's canon that she hears something. Anyways, the next scene really caught me off guard my first playthrough. Heather approaches Douglas and goes Bundy for a second, and Douglas sounds like he's about to have a stroke. I was too, frankly, but it turns out Heather just has a really sick sense of humor. And then it's over. Yeah, that's it. It's over. Douglas and Heather chat for a second and the credits roll. This was the end of the series, or at least it was meant to be. This was the way that Team Silent visioned the conclusion of their masterpiece, and while bittersweet, they've created one of the most beloved brands and franchises through masterful storytelling and distinctive, purposeful game mechanics. This one gets a 9 out of 10. So Silent Hill 3 isn't the GOAT either. We gotta be close. What about... Shh, Zed, you hear that? What the hell was that? Shit. It's the GOAT, Zed. Come on.